Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 29th of November 2023, a little bit earlier than usual today. I have a meeting at my boys' school, educational psychologist. Ooh, that sounds exciting or ominous or something. Anyway, I'm doing this one a little bit earlier and my further videos today will be released later than usual. Sorry to those people living on the right-hand side of the world. Obviously, I live in the centre, and the world is divided into where I live, the left and the right. Of course, that's I don't really mean that. Or do I? So let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Just to, of course, I know that if you keep going right, you come back round to where you are. We live on a globe, unless it's a flat Earth. And I don't know. I do know. Shut up. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to this video just below. Now, we are back up to some pretty heavy figures for the Russians. It seems like that blip in terms of weather is now in the past. 1,140 personnel is a huge loss for the Russians. Not the biggest, but then we have seen as high as 1,300 as of late. But 1,140 would otherwise be a kind of record day of losses had we not seen some spikes recently. 15 tanks, 27 armoured personnel vehicles, back up to really considerable losses there in those categories, and 32 artillery systems. That is huge. I mean, really, that's 50, 60, 75 bits of equipment just in those categories. And then, of course, you've got 3 multiple launch rocket systems, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. I mean, that is 3 times what the daily average is for anti-aircraft warfare systems, and if they are high value, then that is a bad day at the office for the Russians. 2 cruise missiles and 39 drones. We've had some fairly heavy nights of drone activity the last couple of nights. Over the last week, I guess. The weather has got in the way of drones 2 nights ago plus. 46 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 8 pieces of special equipment. So those 2 categories are back up to being really significant. The vehicles and fuel tanks, 46 lost in one day is massive. Remember, I told you that Madya announced as the guy in charge of one of the famous drone units in Ukraine. He said that here's an image, or here's some video of a truck being blown up. We've got loads of these bits of imagery and we don't upload them because they're a bit boring. So that's to suggest that when you do see evidence of things getting destroyed, it is indicative and not a one-for-one correlation. It's really important. I know I keep belaboring that point, but it is really important. If you expect to see evidence for everything lost in this war on either side, you won't find that. So what do we see in Andrew Perpetua's list? So this is the mapper that looks at the Russian and Ukrainian losses on a daily basis, tots them up from the socials and has a spreadsheet. This is another example of what's something we see quite often, which is terrible loss ratios for Russian to Ukrainian losses. Now, there's been a couple of days over the last 2 weeks where we've seen parity. In fact, one day where Ukrainian losses were higher than Russian losses. Of course, you're going to get that. This list that you see in front of you is a sort of list that Ukraine need every single day if they are going to prevail in this war. They need those ratios to overcome the huge stockpiles that Russia has concerning equipment. As you can see here, the Ukrainians have lost an 80K6M radar to a Lancet. That will be a sore loss. Leopard 1A5, it's a first Leopard 1 that we have seen lost. And other than that, usual kind of bits and pieces, not a lot of equipment. And let's see if Russia has a higher value list of equipment. And absolutely. So we've got Borisoglepsk, that's an electronic warfare system, as Andrew says, 5th time in that direct area. So they have lost an awful lot of these EW systems. That's an expensive one, that. And then there's actually 3 other EW systems that have been damaged by first-person view drones, surveillance and comms equipment, And then it's down to some artillery, including a Tulpan, the 240mm self-propelled howitzer there. Some tanks, mainly TATs, one T-72, but 5 tanks lost. 5 IFVs of varying types, and then down to trucks and civilian vehicles, and a lot of them. He's actually included harbour barriers, and he's put dolphins have been freed here, so not damaged, not destroyed, but freed. Dolphins will have basically, the Russians keep dolphins to do activity in the Sevastopol port area in terms of protecting the port. They're trained in a way where they can identify, I believe, if divers are in the area or so on and so forth. They're kept in a pen. I presume that means that pen has been broken and they have been able to escape, as well as 2 sets of harbour barriers. We'll come on to that a little bit later. In conclusion, he says very formally, the Russians have lost more stuff than the Ukrainians. Of course, that single radar loss for the Ukrainians might be a bit of an issue. Right, just a bit of anecdotal evidence to support high casualties for the Russians. This is an Ossetian battalion in the Krinky area. These guys come from the one of the annexed areas, an annexed area of Georgia. They drink pure alcohol and say that out of the company of 86 people, only 7 returned. So they are operating at less than 10% of their company. Of course, that is combat ineffective, but it is worse than that. I mean, those are catastrophic losses, although it's anecdotal and just in one company. Right, here we have, and this has done the rounds, various comments about this. Russian Major General Vladimir Zadavsky, a deputy commander of the 14th Army Corps, was killed, presumably killed by a mine. That's a report. So this is obviously bad news for the Russians. That's a high-level officer taken out in the war. Another Russian electronic warfare system, so this goes back to that Borisoglepsk 2, destroyed by a HIMARS strike. This is where HIMARS are being used to take out high value but single bits of kit, rather than at the beginning of the war we saw, or beginning of their usage in the war, we saw them taking out depots and troop accumulations and things like that. They're now being used much more along the sort of front lines to support activities going on there, and indeed kind of how they're designed to be used, which is as a replacement to artillery, just much more effective and precise. So there is also Estrella 10 here getting hit by a first-person view drone. That could be one of the 3 bits of air defense that Andrew Perpetua, no, not that, the General Staff listed in their daily losses. That is a short-range air defense system, but I don't know of any other air defense systems, so it'd be interesting. That's one of those categories that's really important to keep an eye on, because obviously that can dictate air advantage and then potential air superiority, which can then have a huge ramification on the activities going on the ground. So talking about that Leopard 1A5, there's a video out. You can see all these videos in the description below. I'm not going to play them because, I get restricted when I do, unfortunately. But here we have a Ukrainian Leopard 1A5 tank being hit by the Russians and later abandoned by its crew after it drove through a field and fired at Russian positions somewhere on the front line. This is the first confirmed loss of a Leopard 1 tank. So we're starting to see more and more footage of Leopard 1s. At the same time, the Ukrainians have also lost a high-value bit of kit in this radar I was talking about. So the Russian Lancer hits an ATK-6M radar station in Velika Kostromka in Dnipropetrovsk. So this is kind of north, in fact, you got it here, north of the Dnipro River, kind of west of the Zaporizhia Reservoir. And that is a Lancet getting into Lancets are becoming yet again a real issue for the Ukrainians. So that is a geolocation revealing it was located very close to where a Ukrainian ST-68U was destroyed by suspected glide bombs recently. So this is an area that the Russians are obviously keeping a close eye on, and that is that ST-68U. That is a surveillance radar as well. So two radars very close to each other being taken out. This is an important loss for Ukraine, as Radio Nukes says. ATK6M is a large S-band 3D phased array radar produced in Ukraine. This is one of the most capable radars that Ukraine operates, and very few have been produced from what we can tell. Specs are in the technical brochure, images 3 and 4. So that's what it looks like. Having one of these get destroyed is a problem for the Ukrainians. This is a high-value piece of kit. The Russians are doing a fairly decent job still of taking out Ukrainian kit. It's not all, you may get the wrong impression when I report on a daily basis that the Ukrainians are doing a marvelous job and the Russians are not. But I think the last few weeks has showed us that the Russians still have really significant drone capability in terms of Lancets. They have come back with a vengeance, and they are being used effectively. There is a Russian warehouse on fire in Yaroslav. This is not the first time we've seen such activity. Don't know whether it has anything directly to do with the war, but certainly we are seeing more. We are seeing an awful lot of big fires at Russian commercial and industrial properties, and it is anomalous. I've talked about these statistics with you before, because I know some of you say, look, health and safety is bad in Russia. This is part of the course. Actually, there have been several analyses that show that there are more and bigger fires by quite a large margin than there were prior to this war. So it is in some way connected to the war, no doubt. Right, going on to distance strikes and whatnot. Last night there was another fairly sizable wave of Shahed drones going into Ukrainian airspace. All 21 of them were taken out. This is really good news, because if they can, it depends how they're taken out. I'd be interested to see what percentage of these were taken out by low-tech firing lead into the air type air defense. The more they're taken out by that, the less overwhelmed the Ukrainian air defense is, and the less exhausted the high-value air defense missiles become, and the more able they are to be able, the more able the Ukrainians are to take out things like cruise missiles and ballistic missiles with those higher-end air defense systems. So, yeah, we heard the other day from that big 75 wave Shahed attack that was something like 53% of them, was it, I think, taken out by low-tech air defense. That is a significant change from previously. Well, previously the interception rate wasn't nearly as high, and most of those drones would have got to their destination. But the Ukrainians have done such a good job, and allied nations have done a really good job of tooling up the Ukrainians to the point where they can take out 100% on a good night of Shahed drones. There were 2 out of 3 X-59 guided aircraft missiles that were taken out. I don't know where the other one went. I know that they were going for Staro-Konstantinov, which is, it says here, Russia targeted the historical village of Staro-Konstantinov. I think it's there's an airbase there, so I think it's more likely they targeted the airbase rather than the cultural landmarks of that place. But as you can see from Flash News here, the drones were destroyed within Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kyiv, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Khmelnytsky. So all over the shop, really, in terms of what they were aiming for. And if you've got 21 drones going at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 7 different locations, that means at the very most, you've got 3 Shaheds per location, to average that out. But if there are other locations as well, that will change that. So, point being that's not many Shaheds per location. This is more like, although that seems quite a sizable wave, it's more like sounding out different air defense systems. I would have thought, and the network coverage, because it seems less effective to me to send 21 at lots of different places. I would try and overwhelm one place with 21. But hey, that's why I sit in an office on the south coast of the UK. As a result of the storm, a Shahed has fallen in occupied Crimea. So it is still tricky conditions to operate these machines. Kherson has been hit again by shelling. It is constantly hammered. The last couple of days have been really challenging for Kherson, and this is another reason why the Ukrainians need to succeed around there, across the river, in Krinky, in Pidstepny, and in Pishchenivka, and around Oleshki, because the Russians are hammering Kherson. It's horrible to be there, but of course, this will also include aviation strikes, and that's less easy for the Ukrainians to push those back until they move significantly into the Kherson Oblast. And at the moment, it's looking fairly unmoving on that front, which is a real shame for the Ukrainians. Now, there is other stuff taking place. So here's an explosion in the Kherson area on the railway line between the Dnipro River and Crimea and Armyansk. So the Ukrainians are routinely sort of hitting logistics behind the lines. And also, I don't know if this has, I mentioned this yesterday, I don't know if this has been opportunistically acted upon, but the booms and protective barriers around Sevastopol and the Kerch Bridge have been washed away by that huge storm. So you've got that ring of harbour barriers into Sevastopol not there, potentially, and the protective boom around the Kerch Bridge. And I don't know whether the sea has affected the scuttled ferries and whatnot that were apparently placed around the bridge too. So point being that the Ukrainians might well have targeted these with maritime drones. Just don't know. There was an explosion in Sevastopol last night. No idea whether that was a missile, aerial drone, or a sea drone, or whatever. But that seems like a fairly sizable explosion in the distance there. Right. So you might see some activity, some drone activity around Sevastopol as a result of the storm. Going on to other bits and pieces, Anton Gerashchenko here says, just randomly about some internal Russian things. Alcohol prices in Russia will rise 3 times. Putin has signed a decree to raise liquor taxes from the 1st of May 2024. Tax on wine will increase quite considerably. Sparkling wines, including Russian champagne and wine beverages. Tax on liquor and fortified wine, as well as alcohol with a strength of more than 18%. And cigarettes will also rise in price as a result of tax. Why do I bother saying this? Well, it just, I think, goes to show that Russia needs income from different sources. It needs to get more income to support the war project. I mean, the problem with this is, although you might think wine and sparkling wine is going to hit the more well-off in society, a lot of this, cigarettes and high-strength liquor, will affect probably the poorer in society. And it's just probably not a great sign that everything is going well in Russia, I would think. Now, this is not particularly newsworthy. It's just a nice little statement from Kuleba that Russia is fighting for impunity. Dmytro Kuleba is the foreign minister in Ukraine. Russia is fighting for impunity. Ukraine is fighting for justice. And I like that. Russia's fighting to get away with doing bad stuff. Ukraine is fighting to stop people doing bad stuff. And to simplify that, I mean, just a nice pithy way of putting it that I think is on point. The Kyiv Independent has released a third documentary. You can watch it on YouTube, called Faces of Torture. It's hard to watch. Faces of Torture reveals the harrowing stories of tortured Ukrainian prisoners of war in the notorious Olenivka prison. Just more evidence that Russia are the bad guys here. And if you're sitting on these threads trying to justify Russia's activities, you know who you are, then you are trying to justify war crimes, and you're not a very nice human being. It's pretty much that simple. I have very little time for you if that's what you like to do, trying to justify terrible activities. But Ukrainians are Nazis. No, they're not. Be quiet. Okay. Anton Gerashchenko also says Putin urged Russian families to have 8 children. Having many children and a large family should become a norm, a way of life for all peoples of Russia. Recently, Russian officials of all levels voiced similar thoughts. Now that Putin said this, will it become law? I mean, let us preserve the... Well, we see what he says. Look, go and listen to this, because I think let's get a view into Putin's head, but also an understanding of what the challenges are. They have a challenge with a population that is shrinking due to sending them to war to die, and people running away because they don't want to be sent to war to die. And so you've got Putin trying to play the long game here. Thank God that the tradition of a strong multi-generational family with 4, 5 or more children is being preserved. Let us remember that in Russian families, many of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers had a family of 8 or more children. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. Let us preserve and revive these wonderful traditions. Having many children and a large family should become a norm, a way of life for all peoples of Russia. And the family is not just the foundation of the state and society. It is a spiritual manifestation, a source of morality. It's really trying to connect all these ideas up, these cultural talking points. The tradition of the nuclear family with the woman being just a baby producer for the man, so we can send those kids off to war. Support for a family, motherhood and childhood should encompass the work of all spheres of public administration, he says. Economic, social, infrastructural policy, awareness raising and education without any exceptions. So that's where I wonder, all those sort of women watching that, whether in their heads are thinking, I've got 2 kids and that's enough for me, thank you very much. Yeah, whatever, Poots, you carry on, mate, but ain't changing my lifestyle. Yes. So I think it's also worth noting, whereas it is this one, but let's keep fooling ourselves that this is Zelensky's battle, which he's trying desperately to sell to the West as ours. This is what Putin, pro-Kremlin voices will say, hey, don't let Zelensky sell his war to you. This is Ukraine's war, and the West shouldn't get involved. The US shouldn't get involved. EU shouldn't get involved. This is Zelensky trying to give you his problems. It's like, no. How about you listen to actually what Putin says? So this is another speech he said yesterday. The hegemon's dictatorship is decrepit. Putin on Russia's fight against aggression. So he said, we are fighting for the freedom not only of Russia but the whole world. We openly say that the dictatorship of one hegemon, we see it, everyone sees it now, is decrepit. It has gone into disarray, as they say, and is simply dangerous for the environment. In other words, this is a fight against the US hegemon. This is a fight against the US supreme power and the present world order. This isn't just a Ukraine war concerning Zelensky and his country, and we should just let them get on with it. This is a challenge to the US. This is a challenge to the world order, the liberal world order. And he's pretty clear on that. And it is worrying, and we do need to pay very close attention. We need to support Ukraine as much as possible. Go and see. I really, really found it gratifying to talk to Greg Terry last night. Go and check out my live stream. It was really well received. Thank you very much for the viewership there. Yeah, he's a fellow YouTuber, but he does a lot of visiting Ukraine. He's got a lot of contacts out there. Really good chat we had, and hopefully the first of many. We reached across the aisle in many ways, and as I say, I found it very gratifying. Let me know what you think. And finally, Russian state TV couldn't think of a better person than Andrei Lugovoy. So, who is he and what's he commenting on? So, he's weighing in on national TV about the poisoning of Krylo Budanov's wife, Mariana Budanova, and he was smirking throughout the segment. he was the chap who basically poisoned Litvinenko, himself ending up suffering in the poisoning. So Litvinenko was a Russian dissident in the end, in London, who was poisoned. It was 2008. Came over to London, poisoned him. Then, of course, there's Skripal, who was poisoned, and his daughter in Salisbury back more recently. But this is just very overt interference and activities in the UK by Russian entities, killing people on our soil. Anyway, the guy that poisoned him then went back to Russia, and they basically know it was him. And Russia came up with all sorts of explanations as to how he was innocent and it wasn't him. Now he's being wheeled out to talk about Mariana Budanova being poisoned and smirks throughout the entire segment. It's like, do you have no shame, guys? Anyway, that's Russia for you. So at the moment, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. As I say, the next videos will be a little later today, but if you haven't seen last night's live stream, that's probably a good time to watch that. Hopefully, as I say, first of many with Greg. Thank you. Take care. Speak soon.